Marla, a 66-year-old retired teacher from a quiet suburb near Cincinnati, had always believed in the traditions that tied families together. She believed in Sunday dinners, handwritten thank you notes, and the kind of birthday cards that came with glitter and sentiment. But in the years since her husband Rick passed away from pancreatic cancer, the traditions had withered one by one. Only Jeremy, her son, gave her any reason to keep setting the table for more than one. When Jeremy married Elise, everything shifted. Elise was polished, self-assured, the type who never stumbled over her words or her own opinions. She was a rising star in sustainable design, speaking in crisp, curated sentences like someone who'd practiced in front of a mirror. The first time Marla met her, she'd worn a minimalist beige dress and handed Marla a list of dietary restrictions. Not even a hug, just a firm handshake and a tight-lipped smile. Still, Marla tried. She gave up her pork chops for lentils, swapped out her lace tablecloths for recycled hemp runners, and nodded through lectures about ethical parenting. But nothing she did ever seemed enough for Elise. Every encounter left Marla feeling like she was failing a test she didn't understand. It wasn't one big moment that tore the seams. It was the steady unraveling. Christmas dinner 2 years ago, Elise refused to touch the stuffing because it had turkey broth. Last year, Elise brought her own meal in Tupperware and made a show of placing it in the center of the table, like some exotic relic. When June was born, Marla's joy was immediate and overwhelming. She pulled out the wooden crib Rick had built, the same one Jeremy had slept in. She cleaned every block, every teddy bear, every board book she'd once read aloud. She emailed photos of them to Elise, hoping to share a piece of their history. Elise's response: "We appreciate the thought, but we're avoiding gendered toys and vintage materials that might be unsafe. Please don't hold on to anything for us." That one stung, not just for the dismissal, but the cold efficiency. No warmth, no thank you. Just a clear boundary drawn in permanent marker. Marla stored the items anyway. Hope, after all, dies slowly. She arranged them in the guest room, imagining little June one day, playing with her daddy's old building blocks, curling up with his favorite bedtime story. The final rupture came 1 week before Thanksgiving. Marla had called Jeremy asking if they'd join her. "I'll make whatever you want," she'd said, her voice gentle, almost pleading. "Just tell me what Elise would like. I'll make it work." He told her he'd ask Elise and call her back. He didn't. 2 days later, a text came, not from him, but from Elise. "We've decided to have our own celebration this year, with people who understand where we're at in life. We don't eat with people who can't evolve." Marla stared at the screen. It wasn't just a rejection of dinner. It was a rejection of her, of everything she stood for, every plate she'd set, every story she'd told, every piece of herself she'd wrapped in casseroles and hand-knit baby socks. She cooked the meal anyway. Turkey green bean casserole, sweet potatoes with toasted marshmallows. She even made Elise's dreaded vegan loaf just in case. But the table stayed empty. She ate in silence, the only sound the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional creak of the floor. After dinner, she walked to the guest room, switched on the lamp, and took one long look at everything she'd saved. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just moved. One by one, she loaded the van. Crib, toys, blankets, books. 4 trips, no tears. She drove to the women's shelter downtown and handed it all over. "I saved this for my grandchild," she said, voice steady. "They don't want it. Maybe someone here does." The woman at the shelter didn't ask questions, just squeezed her hand and nodded. It was the first kindness Marla had felt in a long time. A week passed. Then Jeremy called. "Hey, Mom. We were thinking of coming down this weekend, so you can meet the baby." Marla paused, staring out the window at the leafless maple tree Rick had planted years ago. "There's nothing here for your baby anymore," she said softly. "You made your choice. I've made mine." Jeremy didn't argue. He didn't even say goodbye. The line went dead, and Marla stood there, phone in hand, breath caught in her throat, not from sadness, but clarity. Some storms don't come with thunder. Some just end leaving behind silence and a sky scrubbed clean. It had been 2 months since Marla last heard Jeremy's voice. 2 months since that bitter phone call, and even longer since she'd seen her granddaughter. Winter had settled over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket, bare trees, gray skies, and the sound of nothing but wind scraping past the eaves. Marla had settled into the quiet. Not welcomed it exactly, but accepted it. She kept to her routines. Grocery trips on Mondays, laundry on Wednesdays, coffee and crosswords every morning in Rick's old recliner, which she still hadn't had the heart to move. So when she heard a car pull into the driveway that Saturday morning, her heart didn't leap. It twitched. A small, reflexive hope she squashed immediately. She peered through the front curtain. It was Jeremy's car. He stepped out slowly, shoulders hunched, hands jammed into the pockets of his coat. No car seat, no diaper bag, no Elise. Just him. Marla didn't move from the window until he was halfway up the steps. He raised his hand to knock, hesitated, and before his knuckles touched the door, she opened it. He blinked at her. "Hi, Mom." She didn't speak. She simply stepped aside. Jeremy walked in like he was entering a courtroom. Slow, cautious, unsure of where he stood. He didn't take off his coat, just sat down on the couch with a sigh that sounded more like surrender. Marla stood across from him, arms folded. "I'm sorry," he said, eyes still on the scratched coffee table, the one he'd ruined when he was 7, trying to carve his initials with a house key. Still, Marla said nothing. She left, he continued. "Elise took June. They're in Seattle now, with her sister." Marla's stomach tightened, but she didn't react. Not yet. When she asked. 2 months ago. Said she needed space. Said I wasn't supportive enough. Said I was letting toxic, regressive influences affect my parenting. He looked up then. "She meant you, Mom." Marla met his eyes. They were bloodshot weary, not from crying, but from carrying too much too long. She cut off everything he said. No FaceTime, no photos. She blocked my number the second she landed, sent a lawyer's letter a week later. She's filing for sole custody. Marla's lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. She didn't trust herself yet. Jeremy rubbed his hands over his face. "She claims I'm emotionally unstable, that I've refused therapy, that I allowed unsafe people near our child." He laughed bitter. "She included you in the paperwork, called you emotionally backward and hostile to evolving family values." He paused, waiting for her reaction. Marla remained still, her breath even. "I know what I let happen," he said. "I know I didn't defend you. Every time you reached out, every time you tried, I let her push you away. I kept thinking it was temporary, that I could keep the peace, that Elise would eventually ease up. But that peace cost too much." He looked like a man unraveling, held together by guilt and a fragile thread of hope. "I thought being a good husband meant compromising," he said. "But I compromised you. I let her erase you." Still Marla didn't speak, but her stance softened just slightly. Jeremy pulled a folder from his bag, thick, disheveled, heavy, with printed emails, legal notices, and transcripts of blocked texts. "I've hired a lawyer," he said. "But Elise has money. Her family's backing her. And Angela, her parenting coach, is acting like June's second mother. They're trying to make me irrelevant." He slid the folder onto the table, hands trembling. "I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm not even asking you to forgive me. His voice cracked. "I need someone who remembers who I was, who can tell the court I'm not dangerous, that I'm not what Elise is trying to paint me as." Marla stepped back slightly, crossed her arms tighter. "Why would I do that?" she asked. "Why should I fight for someone who stood by while I was dismissed, who let his wife make me feel obsolete in my own family?" Jeremy didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. He nodded slowly. "You're right," he said. "I don't deserve your help." Silence stretched between them. The kind of silence that swallows whole years of pain words, never spoken wounds left to fester. Marla studied him. Not the man he had been molded into, but the boy she once read stories to, the teenager who built model airplanes, the college kid who used to call her from campus just to hear her voice. And for the first time in years, she saw a flicker of that son again. Not Elise's husband, not June's father, just Jeremy. She turned and walked out of the room. He didn't stop her. 5 minutes later, she returned with a small book in her hand, its corners frayed, cover faded but intact. "Guess how much I love you," she said, placing it on the coffee table in front of him. "Start by reading this to her, even if she can't hear you right now." Jeremy stared at the book, then at her. His voice broke. "Mom." She didn't hug him. Not yet. But she didn't ask him to leave either. The book sat untouched on the coffee table between them. Marla had returned to her chair across the room, keeping a careful distance. She wasn't ready for closeness. Not yet. But Jeremy was still there, and that in itself was something. He hadn't shaved. His eyes looked hollow, like he hadn't slept in weeks. He kept glancing down at the folder beside the book, as if it might bite him if left alone too long. "I didn't come here just to dump my problems on you," he said, finally, breaking the quiet. "I know what I did, or didn't do more like." Marla sipped her tea. She didn't answer. That too was intentional. Jeremy cleared his throat and opened the folder. He pulled out the first few pages, legal paperwork, stamped with Elise's lawyer's name. "She's not just filing for sole custody, Mom. She's building a case, like I'm a threat, a danger to our daughter." His voice faltered. "She claims I let June be around unstable people, that I resisted therapy, resisted modern parenting norms. And she named you. In every affidavit, every supporting document you're listed." Marla raised an eyebrow, but still didn't speak. She wanted him to sit with it. All of it. He kept going. "She says you tried to give us outdated, unsafe items, that old crib, the wooden toys. Said you made June vulnerable by refusing to follow accepted parenting standards. That crib," Marla said finally, her voice flat, "was hand-sanded by your father. It held you safely until you were 3. Jeremy closed his eyes. I know that now. But at the time, I didn't fight her on it. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument. And what about the time she called my Thanksgiving dinner barbaric?" Marla asked, her tone sharper now. "Or the Christmas she brought her own food and told me my pie was toxic. I told myself she was just being cautious, particular, and I wanted things to be smooth." He hesitated. "I thought compromising meant being a good husband." Marla let the words hang in the air. Then she leaned forward. "No, Jeremy. Compromising means both people give a little. You didn't compromise. You abandoned. You erased me because it was easier than pushing back." Jeremy dropped his gaze. "You're right." Marla stood up, walked over to the window. The wind outside pushed dry leaves against the glass, whispering something ancient and restless. She folded her arms. "So now, she's trying to take June away from you entirely," he nodded. "She's got her sister's support. She's got money. A whole web of people who see her as a progressive icon. She's even got that parenting guru Angela living with them, acting like June's second mom." Marla turned around. "And what are you doing? I've met with a lawyer," Jeremy said. "We're fighting the petition, but it's already slanted her way. Her legal team is painting me as unfit, dismissive of modern practices, and with the way she's twisted everything, even the stuff you gave us looks like negligence." He paused. "I came because I need help. Not just legal help, real help. Someone who can say I'm not who she's making me out to be." Marla looked at him for a long moment. "So you want me to stand up in court and vouch for you, after you let her make me feel small for years?" "No," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to tell the truth. Even if the truth makes me look bad, I just can't let her take June away. Not completely. Not like this." The silence that followed was heavy. Marla walked slowly back to the couch and sat down beside the folder. She opened it, flipping through page after page. Elise's declarations, Jeremy's responses, printed emails from parenting consultants, text messages twisted into accusations. It wasn't just about a crib, or toys, or food. It was about a pattern, a calculated erosion of Jeremy's identity and Marla's place in his life. She glanced back at her son. "Do you see it now?" she asked. "Do you see how she reshaped everything to make you doubt what mattered?" Jeremy nodded. "She didn't just push you out. She pushed me out of myself." That finally broke Marla's resolve. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Not warmly. Not yet. But solid. Present. "I'll help," she said. "But only if you're ready to fight for your daughter. And not just in court. With your spine. With your voice." Jeremy's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. "I'm ready. I have to be." Marla gave a small, tired smile. "Then we start here, with the truth." And for the first time in years, it felt like the foundation beneath them had stopped shaking. The folder remained on the coffee table open, and disorderly a collage of legal declarations and heartbreak. The silence in the room felt thicker now, not cold, but heavy, with everything unsaid. Jeremy sat still, his shoulders hunched forward, palms resting on his knees. He didn't try to reach for his mother again. This time he let her lead. Marla leaned back into her chair, her arms crossed over her chest, eyes fixed on the wall across the room. The same wall Rick used to lean against, while sipping his coffee, listening to her read out loud from the Sunday paper. "I used to think being a mother meant showing up no matter what," she said. Her voice soft, but steady. "No matter how you were treated, no matter how tired you got, you just showed up. That's what my mother did. And I did it for you, Jeremy. Every time you brought Elise around, every time she belittled my home, my cooking, my history, I showed up." Jeremy's lips parted, but he didn't speak. Marla lifted her hand gently. "I'm not finished." She took a breath, exhaled slowly. "But I've learned something. Showing up isn't the same as being respected, and loving someone doesn't mean letting them erase you." She stood up again, not abruptly, but deliberately. Jeremy followed her with his eyes, unsure whether he should move, speak, plead. Marla walked out of the room. The creak of the floorboards above him was the only sound for the next minute. Then footsteps. Then the door to the guest room opening barely used. Since that night she cleared it of all the dreams she'd stored there. When she returned, she was holding a thin, worn book. The cover was soft from years of use. The corners frayed, the edges slightly bent. "Guess how much I love you," it read, in faded blue script. A story she had read to Jeremy at least 100 times. Jeremy looked up, blinking quickly. "I meant to donate this too," she said, her tone gentler now, but somehow it slipped between the shelves, like it was waiting for the right moment to be found again. She placed it in his lap. He held it, as if it might fall apart in his hands. Marla didn't sit back down. She remained standing, a quiet pillar of resolve. "Start by reading this to her," she said, "even if she can't hear you right now." He looked down at the book. "I remember this," he whispered. "You used to do the voices." Marla gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I still can." He looked up at her again. Eyes misted over. "Do you think I can fix this? Not just the custody battle, but everything." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat down beside him, this time closer. "That depends on what you're trying to fix. Are you trying to win? Or are you trying to be a father?" "I want to be both," he said, "but I'll settle for being a father. A real one." She nodded slowly. "Then stop thinking like a victim. You didn't just let Elise do this. You gave her permission over and over because it was easier than standing up." "I know," he said. "That's what I see now. She didn't control me. I let myself go quiet. And I lost you. I let her convince me that you were the problem, that you were some relic of the past. But you weren't the problem. You were my last connection to myself." Marla looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the grief there, not just from losing June, but from waking up to what he'd let happen. "You've got a long road ahead," she said. "The legal fight's just part of it. Rebuilding trust, rebuilding family, that's what takes real work." Jeremy wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. "I'll do it. Whatever it takes." She nodded again. "Good. Because you're not the only one who lost something. And I'm not going to walk back into this just to get hurt again." "I understand." Marla reached for the folder and began organizing the papers into a neat stack. She slid them back into their cover and handed them to him. "Take this to your lawyer. We'll start there." He stood slowly, the book still in his hand. "Thank you," he said. Marla looked at the book, not at him. "Read it to her, Jeremy. Read it like you mean it." He swallowed hard. "I will." As he walked to the door, he turned one last time. "You still have that old teddy bear, the one I carried everywhere until I was 5. She glanced toward the hall. "No," she said, "but I remember the way you used to tuck it under your chin at night. That's still yours." He nodded once the door closing behind him, with a soft click. And in that moment, for the first time in a long while, Marla didn't feel abandoned. She felt heard. 3 weeks passed without incident. Jeremy returned to his apartment, but the calls between him and Marla became regular again. Brief, tentative conversations, at first gradually stretching into real connection. He would call from work from his car sometimes, even while walking through the aisles at the grocery store, picking out foods June might like if when he saw her again. They were rebuilding something piece by piece. Nothing rushed. No promises made. But the door that had once closed so painfully was open now, even if just a crack. Then one afternoon, Marla's phone buzzed with a message from Kendra. the teenage daughter of her neighbor across the street. Kendra had always liked Jeremy and followed him on social media for years. "Hey, Miss Marla," the message read. "I thought you should see this. It's from someone Elise tagged in a story. It's weird. Thought maybe it wasn't my place, but..." Attached was a screenshot of a post from a private Instagram account. The username was angelum.west. The photo showed a sunny outdoor brunch table with a few women laughing in soft filtered light. Front and center was Elise holding a mimosa and looking completely at ease. The woman beside her late 30s tan skin, short hair, and a wide motherly smile had June on her lap. Not beside her. On her lap. The toddler was leaning into her head, tucked into the crook of her arm. There was a gold necklace around the woman's neck, and a bracelet with a heart-shaped charm on her wrist. June's little hand was curled around her finger, but it was the caption that twisted Marla's stomach into a knot. "Brunch with my favorite people, love. Being part of your little village, sweet girl." Marla zoomed in, making sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. The woman wasn't Elise's sister. She wasn't a family friend either. And Elise wasn't holding her daughter. Angela was. Angela, the parenting consultant. The one Jeremy had described as a casual helper, a neutral presence, a temporary guide. Marla stared at the image for a long time. Not just because of what she saw, but because of what it meant. Elise wasn't just isolating Jeremy. She was replacing him. That night, Marla sat across from Jeremy at her kitchen table, the photo open on her tablet. She watched his face go from confusion to recognition to full-blown horror. "That's Angela," he whispered. Elise met her in some parenting circle online. She said Angela was just helping, babysitting when she needed a break. Marla gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Does that look like a babysitter to you?" He shook his head slowly. No, it doesn't." He rubbed his temples with both hands, the weight of betrayal pressing visibly on his shoulders. "She told me she needed space. Said I was too controlling, too emotionally reactive. Said I needed to work on myself before I could be a real parent. But she's building a whole new family without me." Marla's voice was calm but cold. She didn't leave to get space. She left to start over, with someone else, someone who agrees with her every move. Jeremy stared at the screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the table's edge. "She didn't just shut me out. She replaced me." "Yes," Marla said, "and she's using your daughter to make it stick." He was quiet for a long moment. What if I lose her mom? What if the court sides with Elise? "You won't," she said, her voice sharp with clarity. "Not if we fight with the truth." Jeremy looked up at her, hope flickering faintly, how Marla pulled out a yellow notepad from a drawer and flipped to a blank page. "We start with her circle. Every person she's relied on to rewrite this narrative, especially Angela. Angela's smart," Jeremy said. "She keeps things vague. She knows how to stay just on the legal edge." "Then we move the edge," Marla said, tapping the notepad with her pen. "We push back. We find what Elise doesn't want seen. And we make it clear that pretending to replace a father with a parenting coach isn't going to fly." Jeremy sat back, breathing heavily. "This is going to get ugly." Marla gave him a long look. "It already is. But now we get loud. No more silence. No more letting her shape the story." He nodded slowly, then glanced again at the photo. June smiling. June unaware. June caught in something she couldn't name. "Whatever it takes," he said. Marla smiled, not warmly, but with the steel of someone who'd been underestimated too many times. Good, she said, because this is the part where we stop surviving and start taking back what's ours. Marla didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen long after Jeremy left the photo of Elise and Angela, still glowing from her tablet screen. The light from the under-cabinet bulb cast long shadows across the table as she sipped her third cup of lukewarm tea. Her heart wasn't racing. It was too grounded for that now. But something had clicked, like a door she hadn't noticed before was suddenly open. Elise had never been impulsive. No, Elise was a strategist. She didn't explode, she erased. Quietly, surgically, with a smile on her face and jargon on her lips. And this thing with Angela, this wasn't new. This was premeditated. Marla opened her laptop and began typing the caption from the Instagram post into a search bar part of your little village. The phrase was too specific to be casual. On the second page of results, she found it an article titled, "Building the Village Conscious Co-Parenting in the Age of Solo Motherhood." It was published on a site called Roots and River Collective. The layout was sleek, all earth tones and clean fonts, filled with calming language about gentle transitions, intuitive families, and maternal-centered bonds. It was vague, sure, but something about it made Marla's skin crawl. She dug deeper, clicked on the Contributors tab, scrolled past names like Sage Mira and Quinn, then stopped. Angela M. West. There she was. Same soft eyes, same necklace. Her bio read advocate for intentional motherhood-conscious family design and non-traditional guardianship rooted in emotional safety. Marla clicked on her articles. One title read, Raising Without Paternal Energy. A love letter to single motherhood by choice. Another, The Maternal Village Healing. Generational Wounds Through Exclusion. Marla read each piece carefully, her stomach twisting with every paragraph. Angela's words weren't overtly hostile, but they were surgical. Each line spoke of removing outdated structures, shielding children from toxic ancestral patterns, and replacing coercive paternal dynamics with nurturing emotional alignment. And just like that, the full picture came into view. Elise hadn't just moved on. She had aligned herself with a philosophy that saw Jeremy not as a father, but as a relic, a contaminant, something to be managed then removed. Marla clicked back to the homepage and searched co-parenting. Up popped a photo gallery from a recent wellness retreat. One image zoomed out showed a familiar figure in the background. Elise. She wasn't a guest. She was a member. There was a captioned Spring Renewal Retreat, hosted by Roots and River Collective. Thanks to all the mothers and caregivers who joined our journey into liberated parenting. Marla sat back staring at the screen. This wasn't a passive friendship between Elise and Angela. This was an ideological partnership, one that had been nurtured for years. Elise had found a community that validated every decision she made to erase Jeremy from June's life. And worse, she had done it with surgical precision. Marla printed out every article, every blog entry Angela had authored. She screen captured every Instagram post and archived every group mission statement she could find. She began building a binder, not out of pettiness, not out of spite, but out of defense, because now she understood what they were really fighting. Elise wasn't simply painting Jeremy as unstable. She was framing his entire presence as harmful, unnecessary, obsolete. And with Angela's help, she'd built an emotional fortress around that lie. The next morning, Jeremy showed up before she could even call him. "I couldn't sleep," he said. What did you find Marla handed him the first 10 pages of printouts? Everything. Elise didn't stumble into this relationship. She's been building this world for years. He sat at the table flipping through the pages, eyes wide, as he read Angela's writings. She said all this publicly, proudly. Marla replied, and she's doing it under the guise of protection, framing herself and Angela as the only emotionally safe people for June. Jeremy shook his head in disbelief. But this is insane. This isn't co-parenting. It's ideology, cultish almost. And it works, Marla said, because it sounds gentle. It sounds smart. But underneath, it's weaponized language. He looked up. We need to show this to the lawyer. We will, Marla said, already pulling out a second folder. And I'm not stopping there. I want this documented in court. I want the judge to see that Elise isn't just seeking full custody. She's engineering a full erasure of paternal identity. Jeremy closed the folder slowly. She's trying to raise June in a world where I never existed. Marla didn't argue. He was right. But for the first time in this battle, she didn't feel helpless. She felt armed. No more waiting, she said. Now we fight back with receipts. Marla hadn't boarded a plane in over a decade, but when the stakes are high enough, even old habits dissolve. She booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, under her maiden name, Wells Not Harper, and packed light a carry-on bag with a change of clothes, a modest purse, and one black binder filled with every scrap of evidence she'd printed, annotated, and indexed. She didn't tell Jeremy she was going. This part, she said over the phone the night before, needs to be mine. He didn't like it, tried to argue, but she'd already made up her mind. I've sat in silence long enough, she told him. This is about your daughter, but it's also about reclaiming the ground they pulled out from under us. The flight was quiet, uneventful. She landed in a drizzle that Seattle seemed to wear like a second skin. Her motel was a 10-minute walk from the Roots and River Collective, a converted Victorian house, dressed up in ethical branding and muted signage. From the outside, it looked harmless, inviting even. Marla had done her homework. The collective hosted parenting workshops, emotional wellness circles, and conscious co-living mentorships. Everything was dipped in soft language and wrapped in the language of empowerment. But beneath it, she'd seen the same message again and again: remove the noise, isolate the child from legacy harm, and create a new controlled ecosystem. On Monday morning, she dressed carefully, blending in without drawing attention. Plain slacks, a blouse Elise might call conservative, a long wool coat, and her late husband's umbrella. The only accessory she wore was the gold bracelet Rick had given her on their last anniversary. Just enough to remind herself why she was doing this. Inside the center, a young receptionist greeted her with the kind of exaggerated warmth Marla had come to expect in places that preach mindfulness. Hi there. Welcome to Roots and River. Are you visiting? Marla nodded. I'm considering a donation. I recently retired, and I'm looking to support organizations that focus on maternal empowerment. I read about your collective and was especially interested in Angela West's work. The receptionist beamed. Oh, that's wonderful. Angela's here today, actually. Would you like to meet her? That would be lovely, Marla said, cool and composed. Angela appeared 10 minutes later, dressed in flowing linen and minimalist jewelry, her smile serene and well-practiced. Hello, she said, extending a hand. I'm Angela. Thank you for your interest in our work. They shook hands. I'm Marla Wells, she said. I've been following your blog for a while now. Impressive insight. Very thorough. Angela gestured to a sun-drenched sitting area, filled with oversized floor cushions, and reclaimed wood chairs. "Please, let's talk." They sat. Marla declined the herbal tea. "I was particularly moved by your piece on conscious co-living," she said, pulling a copy of the article from her folder. "You live with a mother and child currently?" "Yes." Angela's expression didn't flicker. "I do. It's been a beautiful healing experience. Would that be Elise Harper and her daughter?" The smile tightened. "Just a fraction. I'm not sure I should confirm names. Privacy is important here." "Of course," Marla said, pulling out the printed Instagram photo. "Then I suppose you wouldn't recognize this image either." Angela's gaze dropped for a second before lifting again, her tone even. "Social media can be misleading." "Then maybe you can clarify it for Child Protective Services," Marla said, sliding the binder across the table. Angela didn't reach for it. "I know who you are," Marla continued, her voice still low and calm. "You're not just a friend. You're functioning as a guardian. You're helping a woman sever her child from her father with philosophical cover and brunch photos." Angela folded her hands. "This is inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" Marla said, sitting straighter, is pretending to nurture a child while emotionally disappearing her father. "Jeremy Harper is not abusive. He is not neglectful. He's a man trying to reconnect with the daughter you're helping hide." Angela's eyes narrowed. "You have no authority here." Marla smiled. "You're right. I'm just a grandmother. But that binder contains enough public documentation to raise questions about your role in the collectives. Enough to file a formal concern with CPS. Not an accusation, just a request for investigation." Angela leaned forward. "You wouldn't dare." "I already did," Marla said. "This is just the courtesy visit." For the first time, Angela's mask cracked. It wasn't fear yet, but there was tension. She knew Marla wasn't bluffing. People like Angela didn't fear confrontation. They feared exposure. "I know what Elise is doing," Marla said, standing now. "I know she's trying to rewrite her life with you, as the supporting character, and my granddaughter as the prize. But I also know what a real family looks like, and what you're building here. It's not love. It's erasure, with better branding." Angela stood too. "You're not welcome here." "I never needed to be," Marla replied. "But I'll be watching." With that, she turned and walked out, binder left behind on the low table, like a dropped match in a dry field. As the door shut behind her, the cold air hit her cheeks like applause. She didn't feel tired. She felt clear. By the time Marla's plane landed back in Ohio, the first domino had already fallen. Angela's blog, once a polished gallery of spiritual parenting mantras and curated motherhood essays, had gone offline. The collective's homepage now redirected to a maintenance notice. And Angela's Instagram, the one with the now infamous brunch photo, was set to private by dawn. The binder Marla left behind had done its job. 3 days later, Jeremy's attorney called with news. Candace's sorry Elise's legal team just reached out. They're requesting to pause all court proceedings. Informal language, no filings yet. Sounds like they want a private settlement. Marla was in the middle of reorganizing a bookshelf when he called. She didn't even look up. "Of course they do," she said, "because we just kicked their strategy out from under them." Jeremy was cautiously optimistic. "Do you think this means she's scared?" "No," Marla said, slipping a photo album into a box labeled family. "She's cornered. Cornered people aren't scared, they're dangerous. That's why I'm coming to the meeting." Jeremy hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to," Marla interrupted. "They need to see the woman they tried to erase. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday in Columbus, at a neutral legal mediation center. Elise was flying in for it. Angela, according to her attorney, would not attend. That part was crucial. Without Angela's presence or endorsement, Elise's new family image had no anchor. But Marla wasn't relying on absence to make her point. She came prepared. She entered the building that morning, dressed like the woman Elise never wanted to acknowledge, a strong Midwestern matriarch, in a navy blue skirt suit, subtle pearl earrings, and freshly polished shoes. Her hair was pinned in soft curls, her makeup minimal, but her expression, unmistakable resolve. Jeremy looked up as she walked in, sitting stiffly at the long oak table with his lawyer. "You look like you could teach a courtroom," he whispered. "I've taught worse," Marla muttered, sliding a thick folder into her lap. Elise arrived 10 minutes late, trailing her attorney and a muted cloud of lavender perfume. She wore a sleek blazer over a linen blouse and avoided eye contact with both Marla and Jeremy. No smile, no acknowledgement. Marla noted that. The meeting began with Elise's lawyer speaking quickly, clearly rehearsed. "We believe it's in the best interest of the child to avoid prolonged litigation. Our client is willing to explore a shared custody agreement, provided it emphasizes stability, routine, and emotional wellness." Marla leaned forward. "No." The lawyer blinked. "Excuse me." Marla opened the folder and began laying out papers on the table. "You cut me out of my granddaughter's life. You let your client build a fake family and sold it as progressive parenting. Then, when it started to fall apart, you called it emotional wellness. Let's talk about what that actually means." She placed the first paper down an affidavit from one of her former students, now a teacher herself. It detailed the mentorship Marla had provided over the years, painting her as a grounded, compassionate educator who shaped lives, not damaged them. Next was a letter from the women's shelter, where Marla had donated the baby items. The director wrote that Marla was one of the most selfless, quietly powerful women they'd ever met. That her donations had helped more than a dozen families find hope again. Elise shifted slightly in her seat. Then came the final document, a notarized statement from a former Roots and River Collective employee, a woman who had left quietly 2 years earlier. "I worked under Angela West for 9 months, the statement began. During that time, I witnessed her encourage vulnerable mothers to cut ties with family members she labeled as energetically toxic. She would refer to it as emotional clearing. But it wasn't therapy. It was control. The final paragraph hit hardest. I watched Elise Harper become isolated, paranoid, and wholly dependent on Angela. This wasn't empowerment. This was coercion, masked as growth." Elise's lawyer stopped flipping through the papers. His jaw tightened. "I believe this is called character assassination," Elise said through clenched teeth. Jeremy finally spoke. "No, this is accountability." The room went quiet. After a beat, Elise's attorney cleared his throat. "I'd like to suggest a revised arrangement." In the end, Elise didn't have a choice. The offer she once confidently denied now came from her side. A formal proposal was drafted by the end of the session. Jeremy would have primary custody during the school year, with Elise allowed visitation over school breaks and summer. A court-appointed co-parenting counselor would monitor all transitions. Angela West would have no legal or unsupervised access to June. Her relationship with Elise was flagged in the official court record as potentially influential to the child's emotional stability pending review. The storm had shifted, not ended but turned in Jeremy's favor. And as they left the room, Marla handed Elise one final envelope. Elise looked down at it suspiciously, then opened it. Inside was a photo, the old crib, the one Elise had called unsafe, and a handwritten note that read, "This held a real family once. Shame. You'll never know what that feels like." Elise didn't chase her, didn't yell. She just stood there holding the photo frozen while the world moved on around her. It wasn't the kind of courtroom drama you see on television. No gavel slams or shouting matches. Just a clean, quiet conference room inside the county courthouse, with walls painted in calming gray, and a table too large for the 4 people gathered around it. But the silence in that room carried more weight than any judge's verdict, and for Marla, it was the silence before the final necessary shift. After Marla's bombshell presentation during the private settlement meeting, Elise's team had returned to the negotiation table, reluctantly, suddenly more interested in flexibility. It was clear that the image they'd so carefully curated Elise as the forward-thinking ethical mother, surrounded by a healing community, had cracked under the weight of Marla's evidence. Still, the deal wasn't final until it was signed in front of a judge, and Jeremy's lawyer insisted on an official courtroom review for transparency and enforcement. That morning, the courtroom was subdued. Jeremy sat beside his lawyer, a stiff gray suit, hiding the tremble in his hands. Marla was behind them, calm and poised. Elise entered next, dressed in sleek black and minimal jewelry, accompanied by her attorney. Angela was nowhere in sight, which by then was expected. Her retreat into the background was the last piece of confirmation Marla needed. People like Angela don't vanish unless they're afraid of what might be dragged into the light. The judge, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and an efficient tone, flipped through the case summary. She paused at several spots, raising an eyebrow. "I see this matter was originally framed as a standard custody dispute," she said. "However, these supplemental documents," she tapped the folder, "suggest a more complex situation." Jeremy's attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We've provided updated affidavits, verified evidence, and third-party testimonies that demonstrate a deliberate effort to sever Mr. Harper's parental rights under ideological pretenses." The judge nodded slowly. "And Ms. Harper, is it accurate that you relocated across state lines without prior notification or legal approval?" Elise's voice was steady. "I did. I believed it was in the child's emotional and physical safety." "And Angela West's role?" the judge asked. "Was she providing full-time care for your daughter?" "She was assisting as a friend and mentor," Elise said, "not formally. Yet she was photographed, holding the child in public, repeatedly referred to herself as a guardian in published blog posts, and lived with you and the child in a shared housing arrangement for several months." The judge countered, scanning the documents. Elise's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Marla sat still behind Jeremy, her face unreadable. She hadn't said a word since entering the courtroom. She didn't need to. The judge leaned forward. "I've reviewed statements from educators, shelter staff, and a former employee of the organization Ms. West is affiliated with. These suggest a pattern of manipulation directed at vulnerable mothers. It's deeply concerning." Elise finally blinked. "I was only doing what I thought was best for my daughter." The judge's voice softened, but not kindly. "Intent does not replace impact, Ms. Harper, especially when that impact includes the emotional isolation of a child from her biological parent." Jeremy looked up, then his voice steady, but hoarse. I'm not asking to erase Elise. I just want to be a father again. I want June to grow up knowing her full family, not just the parts that fit someone else's narrative. That landed. After a brief recess, the judge returned with her decision. Jeremy Harper will receive primary custody of the child during the academic year. Elise Harper will retain visitation rights during summer and holiday breaks. All transitions will be overseen by a court-appointed co-parenting counselor for the next 12 months. Jeremy exhaled shakily. The judge continued. Furthermore, Angela West is not permitted unsupervised contact with the child. Any violation of this order will trigger a reassessment of visitation privileges. This is non-negotiable. Elise's expression barely changed, but her lawyer closed his folder with the resignation of someone who knew the battle had been lost the minute Marla walked in. As the courtroom began to empty, Marla stood and approached Elise calmly. Elise looked up her face, still a practiced mask. "I suppose you think you've won?" Marla didn't respond to that. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She held it out. Elise stared at it, hesitated, then took it and opened it carefully. Inside was a small photo, the same one Marla had placed in the binder weeks earlier. It showed the handcrafted crib Rick had built decades ago, soft light falling across its smooth wooden rails. Attached was a note in neat flowing handwriting. This held a real family once. Shame. You'll never know what that feels like. Elise didn't react. Not at first. She just stared at it, the edges of her fingers curling slightly around the image. Marla turned and walked away, without another word. In the hallway, Jeremy waited, holding his daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit in his hand. When he saw Marla, he didn't say anything. He just reached out and squeezed her hand. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, and for the first time since this storm began, it felt like the light was reaching them again. Jeremy moved back in a week after the hearing. He didn't bring much, just 2 suitcases, a duffel bag, and a car seat that had seen better days. But it was enough. Enough to say I'm trying. Enough to say I'm staying, at least for now. Marla didn't throw open her arms or fuss over him like she once might have. They were past that. Instead, she cleared out the guest room and left the door open. No instructions. No expectations. Just space, something she'd once been denied, and now offered freely. The early days were awkward. Breakfasts were silent except for the clinking of forks. Dinners sometimes worse. They circled each other, not quite sure where to begin. There were still bruises between them, invisible but tender. Every now and then, Jeremy would apologize again, not with words but gestures. Fixing the creaky stair rail without being asked. Replacing the old porch light. Leaving her favorite tea bags by the kettle. Marla noticed. Then 2 weeks later, June arrived. The transition wasn't easy. Elise dropped her off at a neutral site, stiff-lipped and silent. June, just shy of 2, clung to her blanket like a lifeline. She didn't cry, but she didn't smile either. Jeremy carried her to the car, whispering soft reassurances all the way home. At first, June barely acknowledged Marla. She kept close to her father, wary of the unfamiliar house and the strange woman who offered juice and picture books. Marla didn't push. She just stayed near, quiet, present. On the 3rd night, it changed. Marla had pulled out "Guess How Much I Love You" from the living room shelf and settled into Rick's old recliner with it in hand. June was on the floor, stacking blocks without much interest. Jeremy was in the kitchen, cleaning bottles. Marla began reading aloud, not directed at June, not even looking at her, just reading like she used to. Her voice slow, steady, soft. By the third page, she felt a small weight on her knee. She looked down. June had climbed into her lap blanket and all. Marla didn't stop reading, didn't speak a word of surprise. She simply shifted, making room, wrapping an arm around the tiny body that leaned in without hesitation. By the end of the book, June was asleep. Jeremy came into the room and stopped in the doorway, his hands still damp from the sink. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. Marla met his eyes. In that moment, everything softened. That weekend, they painted the guest room together. They chose a warm sage green for the walls and a soft cream for the trim. The old mattress was replaced with a toddler bed, complete with moon and stars bedding, that June pointed at excitedly. Marla found a second-hand bookshelf and stocked it with storybooks, plush animals, and a nightlight shaped like a rabbit. Every evening, Marla read to June from that chair. Some nights, Jeremy read too. Sometimes they took turns. It became their rhythm, their language. Marla started cooking again, not just for herself, but with thought, with purpose. Jeremy joined her sometimes, though he still overcooked the pasta and forgot to salt the soup. June became the taste tester, always the first to reach for biscuits or green beans with her chubby hands. There were still moments of tension, triggers. Jeremy forgot to rinse the high chair one night, and Marla snapped harder than she meant to. Another time, he overheard her on the phone, calling Elise cold, and his face tightened not in defense, but in memory. He still carried guilt like an extra limb, but they kept talking, and listening, and adjusting. One afternoon, while folding June's clothes, Marla found the little heart bracelet Angela had worn in that photo. It had somehow slipped into June's overnight bag. Marla didn't tell Jeremy. She didn't need to. She tucked it into a drawer, closed it, and never looked at it again. By mid-spring, their routine had become a new kind of normal. Not a return to the past. There was no going back. But something new forged from the ashes of what had been broken. Marla found herself humming while she did the dishes. She began walking in the evenings again, not to escape the house, but to clear her mind. Sometimes she'd come home to find Jeremy and June napping on the couch, her small form curled into his chest, like she'd always belonged there, because she had. Marla's friends noticed the change. So did the neighbors. But the most surprising shift came from within Marla. Didn't just feel needed again. She felt whole. One morning, while June was painting with her fingers at the kitchen table, Jeremy turned to Marla and said quietly, "I'm going to start looking for a place of our own soon." Marla nodded. "I figured." He hesitated. "You okay with that?" She smiled. "Of course. That's what healing looks like." He looked around the kitchen, the worn countertop, the mismatched mugs, the clock that hadn't worked since 2008. "I don't know how to thank you for all this." "You don't have to," she said. "Just raise her right. Read to her. Let her fall asleep in your lap sometimes." He swallowed hard. "I will." As summer came, the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just peaceful. Not because time had magically stitched up old wounds, but because Marla had finally taken back what had been stolen. Her family, her dignity, and most importantly, her voice.